Attention. If you want to see how the quietest sacrifice leads to the loudest revenge, subscribe now. Hit that notification bell and smash the like button on this video. The price of defeat and the smile of the secret. He grabbed her arm, his face twisted in a mask of betrayal. You lied to me. Our whole marriage, a lie. Eleanor Ellie Kane looked at her husband, David Sterling, her eyes fixed on the waiting $4 million Rolls-Royce Phantom. Then she looked at his mistress, Chloe, who clung to David's arm, her cheap rented dress looking garish under the gala lights. Just 6 hours earlier, Chloe had laughed in Ellie's face, mocking her old 1998 Toyota Corolla. Now, that same woman stared, speechless, at a woman who owned the entire block. Ellie freed her arm, her voice cold as steel. I didn't lie, David, I just waited. The rain in downtown Washington, D.C. had a special misery to it. It wasn't a cleansing rain. It was a gray, gritty soak that made the city smell of wet concrete and exhaust. It was in this rain that Eleanor Kane, 6 months pregnant, tried 3 times to start her car. The 1998 Hunter Green Toyota Corolla, affectionately called the Bean, was not just a car. It was a fortress of anonymity. Its engine, a loud, stubborn thing, finally caught with a cough that sounded suspiciously like a finale. Eleanor patted the dashboard. Come on, Bean, just to the clinic and back. We can do it. Eleanor lived a life of careful, deliberate simplicity. She and her husband, David Sterling, lived in a respectable but painfully average 2-bedroom apartment in a building with no elevator in Arlington, Virginia. David, a mid-level associate at a downtown finance firm, was a man perpetually chasing the next rung on the ladder. He wore suits that were a little too tight, a watch that was a convincing Rolex replica, and a simmering resentment that grew stronger with every bill. Ellie, the electric bill is insane, he had complained that very morning, tossing the envelope onto the Formica counter. And this thing, he gestured to the noisy window AC unit, is probably why. Eleanor, stirring oatmeal, just nodded. I'll be more careful with the lights. She did not mention the building's 2-decade-old wiring. She also did not mention that she could buy the entire building, and the 3 adjacent ones, with a single phone call. Eleanor Vance was, in fact, Eleanor Kane. The Kanes. The family whose name was etched into the granite facades of university libraries, museum wings, and the Capitol building itself. She had left that life 8 years ago, disgusted by the parade of suitors who saw her as a walking, talking trust fund. She met David at a coffee shop where she was, to him, a struggling barista. To her, it was a real-life sabbatical. He had been charming, ambitious, and seemed to see her. When he proposed, he presented her with a diamond chip so small it was barely visible. It's all I can afford, Ellie, he had said, his voice thick with sincerity. But I will spend my life giving you what you deserve. She had cried and said yes, sliding her family's 300-year-old signet ring into a drawer where it remained. For 5 years, she played the part of Ellie Vance. She learned to use coupons, to mend socks, to listen to David's bitter complaints about his boss, Mr. Collins, and his smug rival, Tom. But lately, a new name had entered his complaints. Chloe. Chloe says the Collins account is stagnant. Chloe thinks I should be more aggressive in the team meeting. Chloe has a great eye for fashion. She helped me pick this tie. Eleanor, packing a small bag for her specialist appointment, felt the baby kick. This was the one thing she wouldn't compromise on. Her family physician, the renowned Dr. Heiress, kept his practice in a high-end private maternity clinic in Georgetown. She had told David it was a special program her old family doctor had gotten her into. David, hearing free, hadn't questioned it. She grabbed her keys, the worn plastic keychain clicking, and headed out into the rain, the bean waiting for her like an old, faithful, tired friend. The waxing crescent, the humiliation, the bean's wipers smeared the rain, fighting a losing battle against the downpour. Entering Georgetown was like driving a tugboat into a yacht race. Sleek black sedans and customized SUVs slipped by, their occupants invisible behind tinted glass. Eleanor felt the familiar pang of judgment from other drivers. She finally found the clinic, its entrance discreet and sheltered by a polished brass awning, and parked directly in the ambulatory patients-only zone, gleaming like a Black Panther, was David's rented BMW 5 Series. Eleanor's blood ran cold. He was supposed to be in a budget meeting until 4 p.m. It was 2:30 p.m. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she parked the bean at a metered spot half a block away. She clutched her thin coat and walked, the rain pasting her hair to her face. As she got closer, she saw him. David was standing under the awning, opening the door. But he wasn't alone. With him was a woman, impossibly tall and thin, wrapped in a trench coat that screamed this season, and laughing with a high, tinkling laugh. It was Chloe. Her blonde hair was a perfect, elegant curtain. "David, you are a lifesaver," Chloe was saying, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his chest. "I just felt so dizzy. I think my blood sugar must have crashed." "Anything from my star associate," David said, his voice a low, intimate murmur that Eleanor hadn't heard in years. He was looking at Chloe as if she were the promotion he'd always wanted. "David," her voice was small, lost in the city noise. But he heard it, his head snapping up. The smile on his face didn't just vanish. It curdled. He looked at Eleanor, at her wet hair, her swollen belly, her practical department store coat, and then his eyes landed on the bean. The bean, parked up the street, its faded green paint a beacon of shame. Chloe turned, her eyes doing a slow, insulting scan from Eleanor's worn boots to her face. "Well, hello," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Ellie, is it? What are you doing here?" David stammered, taking a step away from Chloe, as if to create a physical barrier their actions had already crossed. "This is my appointment," Eleanor said, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. "What are you doing here, David?" "With her." Chloe let out that tinkling laugh again, a sound like breaking glass. "This is her." "David, darling, you didn't tell me." She took a step forward, her gaze sweeping toward the Corolla. "Oh my God, is that yours?" she asked, pointing with a red-nailed finger. "That thing, I thought it was abandoned. Are you sure it's safe to drive? I mean, in your condition." Eleanor winced as if she'd been struck. "Chloe, stop it," David hissed, but there was no force in it. He was ashamed. Not of his affair, but of his wife. "I'm just being practical," Chloe said, her smile widening. "A car like that, it's a death trap. People will think, well, they'll think David isn't a very good provider, will they?" She looked at David, a pout on her lips. "And we can't have that, can we? It looks bad on the whole team." "Shut up, Chloe," Eleanor said, her voice shaking with sudden cold rage. "Ellie, for God's sake, keep your voice down," David snapped, his face red. "You're making a scene. People are watching us." "I'm making a scene? I find my husband at my maternity clinic with his assistant, and I'm the one making a scene? I felt dizzy, okay?" David shouted, grabbing Eleanor's arm. "I was being a good boss, something you know nothing about. God, look at you. You can't even bother to look presentable. And you drive that junk heap. Chloe is right. It's humiliating." It was the word humiliating. The word directed at her, at the symbol of her hidden life, that broke something deep inside her, The pain was so sharp, so total, it burned away the tears. Eleanor looked at his hand on her arm, then back at his face. "Take your hand off me, David." "Or what?" Chloe sneered. "You'll hit him with your grocery coupons?" David, seeing the steel in Eleanor's eyes, let go. "Come on, David," Chloe said, tugging his arm. "She's clearly hormonal. We'll be late for our drink." She'd slipped up. The dizziness was a lie. David hesitated, caught between the life he had and the life he wanted. He looked at his pregnant wife, standing in the rain, and then at the sleek, fashionable woman dragging him toward the warmth of his rented BMW. He made his choice. "Just go home, Ellie," he said, turning his back. "We'll talk when you're less emotional." Eleanor watched them get into the BMW. She saw Chloe lean over and kiss him, long and slow, before they pulled away from the curb, splashing a wave of gray, gritty water onto Eleanor's legs. She stood there, soaked, for a full minute. The clinic doorman watched her with pity. Then, she slowly turned and walked into the clinic, leaving the 1998 Toyota Corolla behind. She wouldn't be needing it anymore. The waxing gibbous, reclamation. The clinic was a different world. It was carpeted in a plush cream, smelled faintly of lavender, and had original impressionist paintings on the walls. The receptionist, who only knew her as Ms. Vance, gave her a look of sympathy. "You're soaked, dear. Let me get you a towel." "Thank you, Maria," Eleanor said, her voice flat. She went through the motions of her appointment. The baby was strong, the heartbeat perfect. Dr. Heiress, a kind man in his 60s with piercing eyes, noted her demeanor. "Everything all right at home, Ellie?" he asked, using her first name as he always did in private. "Everything is changing, Dr. Heiress," she said. "Well, you and the baby are in perfect health. There's a strong cane heart in there," he said with a small smile. He was one of the few people who knew her secret. "Thank you, doctor. I'm glad to hear it." After the appointment, Eleanor did not go to the lobby. She went to a private waiting room her family had endowed. She sat on a silk sofa, looked at a small, elegant Monet, and pulled out her phone. She didn't call her mother. She didn't call a friend. She scrolled past David and dialed a number listed as Hernandez. It rang once. "Ms. Kane, I was wondering when you'd call." Ricardo Hernandez was the head of her family's legal counsel. He spoke in quiet, precise tones that had dismantled multi-billion-dollar mergers. "Ricardo," Eleanor said, her voice clear and cold. Every trace of Ellie Vance gone. "It's over. I want the papers drafted by tomorrow morning. Infidelity clause." There was a pause. "Understood. And Mr. Sterling's access? He has a joint checking account with a $10,000 limit. Freeze it, effective immediately. His name is on the apartment lease, but the apartment itself is owned by the Kane 3 Trust. Have him removed. He'll be served at his office tomorrow." "No," Eleanor said, a hard new idea forming in her mind. "He'll be at the National Gallery of Art Gala tonight. His firm bought a table." Ricardo paused again. "Ms. Kane, you haven't attended the gala in 8 years. You are the anonymous donor." "I'm not anonymous anymore. Call the organizers. I will be attending. I want my family's front row table. And Ricardo?" "Yes, Ms. Kane. I want you to serve him at the gala, in front of everyone, tonight." "It would be my pleasure," Ricardo said. She hung up and made a second call. This one was listed as Sloan. "Sloan, I'm at the Georgetown Clinic." "I am 10 minutes away, Miss Ellie," replied a deep, warm voice. Sloan had been her father's chief of security, and hers since birth. "Bring the Rolls-Royce, Sloan." There was a slight, satisfied smile in her voice. "Yes, ma'am. The Phantom it will be. Welcome back, Ms. Kane." She hung up. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window, the wet, tired-looking woman in the $40 coat. It was a ghost. 10 minutes later, the clinic doorman, who had seen her arrive in the Corolla, nearly swallowed his tongue. A car pulled up under the awning, but car was the wrong word. It was a 20-foot vessel of silent obsidian power, a custom-armored Rolls-Royce Phantom, painted an exclusive deep cane blue that looked black in the rain. It was a car that whispered, "Old money," so loudly it deafened everyone on the street. Sloane, in her dark gray chauffeur's uniform, stepped out and opened the rear door. Eleanor walked out of the clinic. She did not look at the doorman. She did not look at anyone. She slipped into the lavish, cream leather interior that smelled of her father's study. "Where to, Ms. Ellie?" Sloane asked, her eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. "Home, Sloane," she said. The real one. As the Rolls-Royce silently pulled away from the curb, Eleanor Vance's phone, a cheap prepaid Android, buzzed. It was a text from David. Eleanor looked at the phone. Then she powered it off, opened a small, polished wood compartment, and set it inside, next to a satellite phone she hadn't touched in 5 years. "What do you think David is texting? And what would you do right now? Text a friend or call a lawyer? Tell us in the comments." The full moon. Public execution. The National Gallery of Art Gala was the event of the season. It was where the DC elite came to show how much they cared, and, more importantly, how much they could give. David Sterling felt like he had finally arrived. His firm had a table, though it was in the back, near the kitchens. But they were in. He'd arrived home to an empty apartment, which annoyed him. He'd yelled at Eleanor's voicemail, thrown on his rented tux, and picked up Chloe. Chloe was vibrating with excitement. She wore a shiny red sequin dress that was too loud for the event, rented from a high-end service. "David, look," she whispered, gripping his arm. "That's Daniel Larrañaga, the tech billionaire. And my God, is that a senator?" David puffed out his chest. "This is our world now, darling. You just have to be willing to take it." He had conveniently forgotten his pregnant wife. He justified it to himself. "She's holding me back. She doesn't understand ambition. She doesn't understand me. Chloe does." "Let's network," he said, plastering on a smile and grabbing 2 glasses of champagne. "I want to introduce myself to Mr. Moreno of Titan Investments." They elbowed their way through the sea of haute couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos. David felt a twinge of insecurity. His tux felt stiff, and Chloe's dress, next to the discreet elegance of the other women, looked cheap. "Mr. Sterling, glad you could make it," said his boss, Mr. Collins, a beefy man who looked flustered. He glanced at Chloe. "And you brought your assistant." "Chloe is an invaluable member of my team, sir," David said, trying to sound important. "Sure," Collins said, clearly disgusted. "Just try to be professional, David. There are a lot of important people here. Don't embarrass the firm." As Collins walked away, Chloe sneered. "Old fool, he'll be kissing your feet when you land the Moreno account." David scanned the room. The front tables surrounding the dance floor were a who's who of American royalty. The Kennedys, the Rockefellers, and the imposing empty table 1, which was always reserved for the gallery's largest, most reclusive donor, the Anonymous Angel. "Look at that," Chloe whispered, pointing to the placard at table 1. "Reserved, I bet it's that Larrañaga guy. He's going to make a huge donation and be everywhere. How tacky." "It's all about the show," David agreed, feeling cynical and worldly. Suddenly, the buzz in the room silenced. A group of paparazzi, normally held outside, were allowed entrance, and their flashes began to pop. "What's going on?" Chloe asked, craning her neck. The gala host, a famous news anchor, walked to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice boomed. We are so deeply honored tonight. For the first time in nearly a decade, our guest of honor, the patron whose generosity built our new wing, has decided to join us. Please welcome Ms. Eleanor Kane. David froze. Kane, as in Kane Holdings? It can't be, Chloe whispered, her face pale. That's one of the richest families in the world. They don't go out. David's heart hammered. Ellie, Kane, no, it's a coincidence. It has to be. Then he saw her. The doors opened. The first person in was Sloane, who looked less like a chauffeur and more like a Secret Service agent. She scanned the room, gave a curt nod, and stepped aside. The woman who entered was not Ellie Vance. This woman moved with a silent, terrifying grace. She was 6 months pregnant, yes, but the pregnancy was draped in a custom, floor-length emerald silk gown. It was a custom Valentino piece, clearly designed to celebrate, not conceal, her condition. Around her neck was a necklace that silenced the room. It was the legendary Kane emeralds, a cascade of deep, flawless green stones that hadn't been seen in public since her grandmother's funeral. They were worth, as one gossip columnist would later write, more than the GDP of a small nation. Her hair, which the rain had plastered to her head, was now a waterfall of rich, warm brunette waves. Her face was serene, powerful, and utterly cold. David emitted a small, choked sound. "That's no," Chloe breathed, her champagne glass trembling. "That's not her. That's not her." Eleanor Kane glided across the ballroom. The organizers, Mr. Collins, and even Daniel Larrañaga, the tech billionaire, flocked to her. "Ms. Kane, what an honor. Eleanor, you look radiant. Thank you so much for coming." She smiled, a small, polite, practiced smile. Thank you for having me, Mr. Moreno," she said, her voice clear and audible to the very man David had been desperate to meet. Moreno slightly bowed his head. "The honor is all ours, your family's commitment to this gallery. We are indebted." Then her eyes swept the room. They passed the tables, past the bar, and finally, they landed on table 42, in the back, next to the kitchens. Her eyes met David's. There was no anger in her gaze, no sadness, no recognition. She looked at him and the woman beside him with the same polite, gentle disinterest she would afford a waiter. She looked through him. Then, she turned and was escorted to table 1, the anonymous angel's table, where she sat down. The undisputed queen of the room. David's whole body was shaking. That is my wife." Chloe finally dropped her glass. It shattered on the floor, the sound impossibly loud in the suddenly silent room. "Oh my God," she whispered. The whispers started immediately. "Isn't that Eleanor Kane? I thought she was a recluse. Who is that man she was looking at in the back? The one with the woman in the red dress. Wait, I think that's David Sterling from Collins and Company. Isn't that his wife?" Mr. Collins was walking toward David, his face the color of ash. "Sterling, what the hell is going on?" But David didn't hear him. He was stumbling forward, pushing through the crowd, his mind a vortex of confusion, terror, and a horrible new emotion. Greed. "Eleanor!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Eleanor!" David broke through the circle of the jet set and stumbled toward table 1. "Eleanor, darling, what is this? What is going on?" Sloane stepped in front of him before he was within 10 feet. She held up her hand, palm outward. "That is enough, sir." "That's my wife," David spat, his face manic. "Let me talk to my wife." Eleanor looked up from her conversation with Senator Solar. She did not rise. She merely tilted her head. Sloane, it's fine. Let Mr. Sterling approach. Sloane stepped aside. David rushed to the table, his rented shoes slipping on the marble. Chloe was right behind him, her face a mask of abject horror. Eleanor, what is this? David gasped, gripping the back of a chair. This dress, these jewels, this is a joke, right? A crazy, elaborate joke? Eleanor took a slow sip of her mineral water. Hello, David. Hello, Chloe. I see you made it. She knows my name, Chloe whispered, as if that were the most terrifying part. I don't understand, David said, his voice pleading. The apartment, the bean, your job. The bean, Eleanor said. A small, cold smile touched her lips. Yes, my 1998 Corolla. It was a gift from my grandfather. A reminder, she said, that a person's worth is not in what they drive, but in who they are. A lesson, she added, her eyes flicking to Chloe. Some people never learn. Chloe shrank, her sequined dress suddenly feeling like a layer of tar. The woman she had mocked for driving a junk heap had arrived in a $4 million limo. The woman she had called indigent wore a necklace that could buy her entire life, her parents' lives, and her grandparents' lives. You lied to me, David whispered, his confusion hardening into rage. For 5 years, you let me kill myself working for peanuts. You let me stress about bills. We could have. What could we have had? Money? Eleanor repeated, the word tasting like ash. It was always about money, wasn't it, David? You didn't love me. You loved the idea of a wife. And when a shinier idea came along, you leaped at it. The only thing you got wrong, David, was your terrible timing. Behind David, a quiet voice said, Mr. Sterling. David spun around. It was Ricardo Hernandez, immaculate in a tux, holding a thick manila envelope. What? David snapped. David Sterling, Ricardo said, his voice polite, yet projecting throughout the ballroom. You have been served. He placed the envelope into David's stunned hand. Divorce papers, Eleanor explained, smoothing the front of her dress. Citing infidelity, among other things. The apartment, which is owned by my trust, will have new locks by morning. The joint account, which I funded, is frozen. Your firm. She nodded toward a ashen-faced Mr. Collins, who was watching a few feet away. Will receive a call from my legal team in the morning regarding the termination of your employment, for using company time and resources to conduct your affair, and for harassing a benefactress at a charity event. Mr. Collins immediately looked faint. You can't do this! David roared, his face purple. He tore open the envelope, pulling out the thick sheaf of papers. I can, Eleanor said, and I have. You see, David, you married Ellie Vance, a barista with no family and no money. But you cheated on Eleanor Kane, and the Kanes, we protect what is ours. My son, she placed both hands on her abdomen, is a Kane. You are nothing. She looked past him, to Chloe, who was backing away, tears of pure, unmistakable terror streaming down her face. And you, Eleanor said, you laughed at my car. It's true. It's old, but it's paid for. Can you say the same about that dress, or him? Eleanor nodded to Sloane. Sloane, please bring the car around. I am suddenly very tired. She turned and walked away, not looking back. The entire ballroom parted for her like the Red Sea. David Sterling stood alone, in a rented tuxedo, holding the ruin of his life in his hands, as the flashes of 100 cameras popped in his face. The eclipse. Total irrelevance. The aftermath was not a war. It was an execution. It was the silent, systematic dismantling of a life, done with the kind of bloodless, terrifying efficiency that only generations of old money can perfect. For David Sterling, the gala night ended, not in a plush bed, but in the back of a taxi he could barely afford, after being physically escorted off the premises. He spent the night at a 24-hour diner, drinking bitter coffee, his rented tux feeling like a clown costume. He was still reeling, his mind a fractured kaleidoscope of emeralds, divorce papers, and the flash of the Post reporter, which felt like it had exploded in his face. "It's a mistake," he kept murmuring to the remains of his mug. "A test. A cruel, twisted test. She'll call. She has to." She did not call. At 7 a.m., he left the diner and walked the 20 blocks to the apartment, a pathetic, desperate hope still flickering. His key slid into the lock and stopped. It didn't turn. He pushed, he wrestled, then he pounded his fist against the solid oak door. "Eleanor, Eleanor, let me in. We need to talk." A small metallic click sounded, and the intercom crackled. It wasn't Eleanor's voice. "Mr. Sterling?" The voice was deep, masculine, and bored. "We are private security. Ms. Kane has left instructions that you are not to enter the premises. If you do not leave, we will have you arrested for trespassing." "This is my apartment!" he roared, his voice cracking. "The lease is held by the Kane 3 Trust, sir, of which you are not a beneficiary. You have 1 hour to vacate the immediate vicinity of the building." The intercom went dead. Defeated and trembling with nowhere to go rage, David stumbled back into the street. He was homeless. At 8:45 a.m., his phone, which he had been charging with a borrowed cord at the diner, buzzed. It was an email from Human Resources. The subject line was chillingly simple: employment termination. "Dear Mr. Sterling," it read, "this email serves as official notification of your immediate termination from Collins & Company for gross misconduct, breach of the morality clause, and conduct unbecoming of an associate of this firm. Your presence at the National Gallery of Art Gala, your harassment of a principal benefactress, and the ensuing public scandal have caused irreparable damage to our reputation. Do not attempt to enter the premises. Security has been instructed to remove you. Your personal effects will be sent to a forwarding address should you provide one." It was signed by Mr. Collins. At 8:47 a.m., he tried to call Chloe. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. He sent a frantic text. "I was fired. Eleanor is a billionaire. She is trying to destroy us. Call me. We have to fight this together." He went to an ATM to take out cash. He had to hire a lawyer. He had to do something. He inserted his debit card for the joint account. The account he'd always felt was his money, even though he knew Eleanor deposited more into it from her freelance work than he did. He entered his PIN. He requested $500. The screen flashed red. She hadn't just frozen it. She had emptied it. The $10,000 limit he thought he had access to was gone. He checked his personal account. Balance, $1,941.75. That was it. That was all he had in the world. His phone buzzed. A text from Chloe. "Don't ever contact me again. You ruined my life." He called her back, and this time she answered with a venomous shriek. "Are you insane? Don't call me." "Chloe, wait, we have nothing!" she screamed. "I just got fired. Fired. Collins called me personally, said I was a disreputable gold digger, and if I ever tried to find work in this city, he would personally blackball me. My landlord just served me an eviction because the firm called and revoked their guarantee on my lease. All because of you." "Me?" David was aghast. "You were part of this. You wanted this. I wanted a partner. I wanted a house in the Hamptons. I didn't want to be on the front page of the Post as the mistress mocked by a cane at a gala." You told me she was a nobody, David. A pathetic, pregnant, broke wife. You didn't tell me you were married to a goddess. You are a fool, David. The biggest, stupidest fool in Washington, D.C. You had everything, and you were too stupid to see it. Goodbye. Lose my number. The line cut off. In the span of 12 hours, he was wifeless, jobless, homeless, and totally, utterly alone. David's world shrank. The next 2 months were a blur of escalating humiliations. He sold his replica Rolex for $300. He sold his ambitious too-tight suits to a thrift store where he got pennies on the dollar. He moved into a dingy shared room at a hostel in Arlington, the smell of mildew and boiled cabbage clinging to his clothes. He became obsessed. This wasn't his fault. It was a setup. Eleanor had defrauded him. She had lied for 5 years, making a fool of him. He was the victim. He was the one who had suffered emotional distress. He took his $1,100 and went to a lawyer. The first 3, all respectable firms, showed him the door the moment he said the name Kane. "We can't help you, Mr. Sterling. I would advise you to take the settlement if one is offered. You do not have a case. You have a death wish." He finally found a man named Leo Salvage, a lawyer who advertised on bus station benches, whose office smelled of stale cigars and desperation. Salvage's eyes lit up when he heard the story. "Fraudulent misrepresentation," Salvage said, leaning back in his squeaky chair. "Intentional infliction of emotional distress. She hid her assets, misrepresented her identity. This is a gold mine, my friend. A gold mine. We'll sue for, say, $20 million. David felt the first glimpse of hope he'd had in weeks. "Yes," he said, his voice raw. "Exactly. She lied to me. She humiliated me." Salvage, of course, was just following a script. He filed the suit, expecting the Kane family to offer a quick, quiet 6-figure settlement just to make the loser go away. He had miscalculated disastrously. The Kanes did not settle. They did not negotiate. They crushed. They didn't just respond. They countersued. They sent in Ricardo Hernandez. The deposition was in a sterile, glass-walled conference room at Ricardo's downtown office. David, in his only remaining suit, now loose on his thinner frame, sat across from Ricardo, who looked as immaculate as ever. Salvage sat next to David, nervously flipping through papers. "Mr. Sterling," Ricardo began, his voice quiet. "You claim my client, Ms. Kane, fraudulently misrepresented herself, causing you emotional distress and financial hardship. Is that correct?" "Yes," David said, trying to sound firm. "She lied for 5 years. She pretended to be poor. She ruined my reputation." "I see," Ricardo said. He opened a filing cabinet. "Let's discuss your reputation. On the afternoon of October 2nd, the day of the gala, you were at the Georgetown maternity clinic with your assistant, Ms. Chloe Vidal. You told your wife you were in a budget meeting. Was that a fraudulent misrepresentation, Mr. Sterling?" Salvage protested. "Relevance. It speaks to the pattern of deception, counsel, of which your client claims to be a victim," Ricardo said softly, never taking his eyes off David. "Let's continue. You claim your distress began at the gala, upon learning your wife's identity. But your distress seems to have begun long before. Let's talk about May 14th. You were on a business trip to Miami. You filed a $4,000 expense report for client entertainment. The client you listed was a Mr. Lope." Ricardo slid a photograph over the table. It was David on a yacht, his arm around a woman in a bikini, who was definitely not Eleanor or Chloe. David's blood ran cold. That's confidential. That is Ms. Anna Petrova, a consultant based in Miami," continued Ricardo. "There is no Mr. Lope. You embezzled $4,000 from your firm to conduct an extramarital affair. An affair, I might add, that took place 3 weeks after Ms. Kane tearfully told you she was pregnant. Salvage's face went pale. David, what is this? And then there is September 2023, Ricardo said, sliding over another stack of papers. Hotel receipts from Napa Valley, a team-building exercise. You were the only team member present, along with a Ms. Vega. And then there is the matter of the bonus you received in 2022. You told your wife it was $10,000. It was actually $50,000. The other $40,000 you diverted to an overseas account, which you have been using to fund, well, this. Ricardo displayed a 3-inch thick binder of text messages, receipts, and photographs. David was not just an adulterer. He was a serial adulterer. He was a petty, habitual liar and a small-time embezzler. Chloe hadn't been the first. She was just the loudest. David stared at the evidence, his mind blank with terror. He had no idea. How could they know? He had been so careful. My client, Ms. Kane, Ricardo Hernandez said, dropping his voice to a whisper. She was willing to forgive your ambition. She was even willing for a time to overlook your emotional negligence. But what she found on the afternoon of October 2nd was not an aberration. It was a pattern. You are a man who is fundamentally incapable of telling the truth. Ricardo leaned in. So no, Mr. Sterling, we will not settle. Your countersuit for emotional distress is a joke. The prenuptial agreement you signed, perhaps you should have read it. The prenup, David stammered. She had nothing. It was a joke. But it was not, Ricardo said, tapping a document that had been copied for salvage, but which he clearly hadn't read. Article 4, Section 2, the Infidelity Clause. It states that in the event of proven marital infidelity, the non-moneyed party, that is you, Mr. Sterling, forfeits any and all rights to spousal support, property, or compensation, present or future, actual or perceived. By cheating on Ms. Kane, you did not just lose your wife, you legally disinherited yourself from any claim whatsoever. Ricardo stood up, smoothing his jacket. You didn't just lie to your wife, Mr. Sterling. You lied to your attorney. This deposition is terminated. My firm will be forwarding our findings regarding your creative accounting to the IRS and the DC Attorney General's office. Have a wonderful day. Salvage, white as a sheet, threw his pen onto the table. You idiot, he hissed at David as Ricardo swept out of the room. You're a dead man. You lied to me. We are done. You are on your own. David sat alone in this glass room, looking at the photos of a life he didn't even remember. A life of casual betrayals that had just culminated in his total and irreversible ruin. The Queen builds her legacy. While David Sterling's world imploded, Eleanor Kane's was being reborn. 6 months after the gala, on a bright, clear spring day, Eleanor gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Arthur Kane, in honor of the man who had been her protector, her driver, and her friend since childhood. Her life settled into a new, powerful rhythm. She was featured on the covers of magazines, not the Post, but Forbes and Time. The reluctant heiress takes the reins, read one headline. She seamlessly took over the Kane Foundation, proving to have her father's keen mind for investment and her mother's compassionate eye for philanthropy. She didn't just write checks. She restructured the entire organization, focusing on women's shelters and legal aid for children. The penthouse in Georgetown, where she had grown up, was no longer a gilded cage. It was a home filled with light and the sounds of her son. The Kane emeralds went back into the vault. Her preferred uniform now was cashmere sweaters, soft jeans, and practical flats. The hunter green Toyota Corolla, the Bean, was still in the penthouse garage, parked next to the Rolls-Royce. For a month, Eleanor couldn't decide what to do with it. It was a symbol of her lies, but also a symbol of her hope. One day, she had Sloane drive her to a women's shelter in D.C., one her foundation was now funding. She met the director, a no-nonsense woman named Maria. Eleanor handed her a check for $5 million. Then she handed her the keys to the Bean. "It's an old car," Eleanor said, "but it's reliable. It got me through the worst days of my life. I thought maybe it could help someone else start theirs." Maria, who had seen everything, had tears in her eyes. "Ms. Kane, you have no idea." It was a crisp autumn afternoon, a full year after the gala. Eleanor was in Georgetown Waterfront Park, pushing Arthur's stroller. The air smelled of roasting chestnuts and possibility. She felt content, healed. She stopped at a vendor stand to buy a bottle of water, and then she heard a voice she hadn't heard in a year, but one that was seared into her memory. $2.50 sus. It was $2 yesterday, that's a ripoff. You're ripping me off. She turned. It took her 10 full seconds to recognize him. The man arguing with the hot dog vendor was a ghost. He was skeletal, his skin sallow and gray. He wore a dirty puffer jacket 2 sizes too big, and his hair was lank and greasy. The simmering resentment she had known so well was still there. But now it was the acidic, desperate rage of the truly indigent. "Price went up, buddy. Take it or leave it," the vendor said, unimpressed. David fumbled in his pocket, pulling out a handful of change, his fingers shaking. As he counted the coins, his eyes drifted up and met hers. He froze, his gaze darting from her face, healthy, calm, beautiful, to the top of the lined stroller, to the sleeping, healthy baby boy curled inside, to the large, watchful figure of Sloane, standing 10 feet away. And finally, to the Kane blue Rolls-Royce Phantom, parked silently on the curb, its polish reflecting the autumn sky. He saw it all, everything he had thrown away. A wave of emotion, so violent it made him dizzy, washed over him. Shame, rage, regret. And then, one last, pathetic, desperate shred of an idea. A con man's last play. He abandoned the hot dog and stumbled toward her, his hands outstretched. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Eleanor, my God, it's you." Sloane instantly stepped forward, her body blocking David's path. "Ms. Kane, shall I call the police?" "No, Sloane," Eleanor said, her voice quiet but firm. She put her hand on the stroller. "It's fine. Let him speak." David looked at Sloane with a glimpse of his old arrogance. "This is a private conversation between my wife and me." "I am not your wife, David," Eleanor said simply. "The divorce was finalized 11 months ago, you know that. What do you want?" Tears, real or manufactured, streamed from David's eyes. "Eleanor, look at me, just look what you did to me. I was a fool," he cried, dropping to his knees on the pavement. People were starting to stop, to stare. "I was an idiot. I see it now. I was poisoned. Poisoned by that world, by the firm, by Chloe. They pressured me. But it was never real. Not like us. I love that life, Eleanor, in the apartment. With the Bean, that was real. I loved that life. I love you. Not the money. I never cared about the money. I love you. I miss you, Ellie. Please, I've learned my lesson. I'm a broken man." His eyes darted to the stroller. "And my son, our son. You can't take him away from me. I have rights." The park was silent, save for his desperate, broken sobs. Eleanor looked down at him, this hollow shell of the man she had once loved, and felt nothing but a deep, final. "You don't miss me, David," she said, her voice as clear and crisp as the autumn air. "You miss what I represent. You say you miss our life? The one where you slept with half of D.C. while I was home, mending your socks? The one where you came home and complained about the electric bill while you diverted $40,000 to an offshore account? That life? Eleanor adjusted her sleeping son's blanket, and her voice dropped. And you dare to ask about my son. His name is Arthur Kane. He will be raised to be a man who values loyalty, honesty, and character. He will be taught that a person's worth is in who they are, not what they drive. He will be, in short, taught to be everything you are not. She looked at him, one last time. This man, kneeling on the dirty pavement. You are right about one thing, David. You were a fool. You had a winning lottery ticket in your hand for 5 years. You had honest, real love, and you were too busy complaining about the paper it was printed on to cash it in. You didn't just lose a fortune, you lost a family. She nodded to Sloane. We are leaving. Eleanor, no, wait, please. He rose, lunging at the stroller. He never made it. Sloane's arm shot out, catching David across the chest. It wasn't a push. It was a simple, immovable stop, like a steel girder. David bounced off her and collapsed back onto the pavement. Do not touch the child, Sloane said, her voice a low, terrifying murmur. Eleanor didn't look back, didn't flinch. She simply pushed the stroller, her steps even and quiet, toward the waiting Rolls-Royce. The car door opened, the stroller was secured, and they slid inside. The door closed with a silent, heavy thud, sealing off the outside world. David Sterling was left alone on the sidewalk, clutching his warm, half-paid-for hot dog, the smell of mustard and failure, his only companion. He watched as the Kane blue limo silently pulled away from the curb, merging into traffic, a river of wealth and power he would never, ever touch again. He had nothing. He was nothing. And worst of all, he finally knew it. Final reflection and call to action. Conclusion. Thank you for staying with us until the end. We've all seen people judged by what they have or what they lack. Eleanor had to build a wall of lies to find something real, only to have her husband, David, prove he was blinded by the very thing she was hiding. He didn't just lose a wealthy wife. He lost a loyal partner and a family, all because he couldn't see a person's value over the price tag of her car. What would you have done in Eleanor's position? Would you ever have revealed the truth? If you were captivated by this story of betrayal and empowerment, please click the like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more real-life drama every week.